Black boy tells pilot, "You're my dad." His response leaves everyone in tears. A swirl of uncertain whispers fluttered through the bustling airport corridor, where families and lone travelers waited for their flights with hopes, worries, and secrets. Kevin clutched a small backpack against his chest, his 12-year-old heart pounding with nervous anticipation. He was traveling with his mother, Ebony, for reasons that neither had spoken about too openly with each other. Ebony had explained that this trip was crucial for them both. She carried the weight of the past in her eyes, but tried to keep her expression calm for Kevin's sake. Still, the determined glint in her gaze told Kevin everything he needed to know. This journey, from their small hometown to this busy terminal, was about something bigger than a simple vacation. Kevin's thoughts danced with a kaleidoscope of questions. He was a curious kid, always noticing little details others missed, like the scuff on Ebony's shoes or how her hands trembled when she handed over their tickets at the gate. She tried to steady herself by pretending to check messages on her phone. He sensed the tension behind her composed smile. Despite his confusion, Kevin felt a surge of confidence growing inside. He had asked about his father many times, about the tall, broad-shouldered figure he saw in the only old photograph they had. Ebony would quickly become quiet, focusing on folding laundry or scrubbing a dish until it sparkled. Eventually, Kevin learned not to push too hard, but he needed answers. More than that, he needed the father he had never truly known. By the time they boarded, Kevin was certain something life-changing was about to happen. His eyes danced from one face to another, passengers brushing past to find their seats, flight attendants offering forced smiles, business people tapping at laptops. He settled into his aisle seat beside Ebony, checking the overhead compartment for his bag. He noticed her shift uneasily. Something weighed on her mind, and though he didn't know exactly what it was, he could almost taste the tension in the stale airplane air. A calm voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard Flight 257 to New York. Kevin's breath caught. He knew that voice from somewhere. There was a gentle authority in the timbre, the kind that could hush a crying infant or command respect in a crowded room. The flight attendants prepared for takeoff, going through their safety demonstration, but Kevin barely paid attention. He was lost in thought, trying to connect a buried memory of that voice to the pilot speaking now. Ebony noticed Kevin's distracted gaze and reached for his hand. He wondered if she feared that his curiosity would become too powerful to hold in any longer, but she only gave him a reassuring squeeze and exhaled a shaky breath. As the plane taxied away from the gate, Kevin tried to ignore the hunch dancing at the edge of his mind. He forced himself to focus on the repetitive flight attendant announcements and the rumble of the engines. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the voice from the cockpit resonated with a past he had longed to understand. He kept turning over in his mind how Ebony had become more distant in the weeks leading up to this trip. She had confided something to their neighbor, Mrs. Davis, a kind widow who had once babysat Kevin. He overheard only snatches of their low-voiced conversation, words like father, pilot, and a name, James. Kevin heard Ebony mention James with a quiver in her tone. After that, she seemed determined to arrange this flight, though money was tight and stress high. When the plane lifted off, Ebony peered out the window as if searching for answers in the vanishing cityscape below. Kevin stared straight ahead, his heart thumping to the rhythmic hum of the aircraft. He secretly wished the pilot would speak again. Maybe the next time that gentle voice filled the speakers, he would recognize the accent, the pauses, the phrasing. Minutes passed in near silence. Kevin was too restless to watch the in-flight entertainment. He sensed Ebony's nerves through the grip of her armrest, her knuckles white from tension. He looked around and saw a few other passengers dozing or reading. One man was struggling with his headphones while a woman across the aisle tried to calm her toddler. The flight attendants politely moved up and down, taking drink orders and handing out small packets of pretzels. Finally, the pilot's voice returned. There was a slight static, but Kevin heard it clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James Reynolds. We're currently flying at an altitude of 35,000 feet. The weather en route looks favorable, so we anticipate a smooth ride. I want to thank you all for choosing us today. We'll be dimming the cabin lights shortly to give you a chance to rest. Thank you, and enjoy the flight." Kevin pressed a hand to his mouth, eyes wide. The name echoed in his thoughts. James Reynolds. He remembered Ebony mumbling that name in her sleep once, or perhaps in the hush of an early morning. He remembered how she looked away whenever he asked about that name. Now it wasn't just a name, it was their pilot's name. A spark of hope ignited deep in Kevin's chest. Ebony must have felt his shift in energy because she stole a quick glance at him. She knew that he knew. He whispered, "That's him, right?" Ebony slowly nodded, her expression haunted. Kevin swallowed hard. A rush of anger, confusion, and excitement churned in his gut. He had never felt so unsteady. He longed to run to the cockpit, to demand answers from the man who might be the father he had dreamed about. But Ebony, with her trembling hand, gently kept him in his seat, as though any sudden move might crumble the careful plan she had laid. Kevin tried to distract himself by thumbing through the in-flight magazine, but every page turned to nonsense. He glanced at Ebony, who stared at the seat back in front of her as though it held some deep secret. He wondered if she was recalling memories of when she first met James Reynolds. Kevin had so many questions. Why had James never come home? Never visited, never called, never written? Could he possibly have a valid reason? As the flight progressed, Ebony slipped into an uneasy rest, her head lolling against the seat. Kevin clutched the armrest and stared at the overhead console. He replayed all the times in school when kids asked about his dad. Some teased him, others pitied him. Teachers were sometimes sympathetic, but their questions felt like prying. Kevin learned to keep his father's existence a private matter. Now, the distance between him and answers was literally just behind the cockpit door. He glanced around at the other passengers, noticing how disconnected everyone seemed, trapped in their own worlds of worry, boredom, or stress. He thought about approaching a flight attendant to say something, anything that might grant him a moment with the captain. But how to do that without causing a scene? He tried not to dwell on it too long. Maybe Ebony had a plan. Perhaps they would speak to James after they landed. The hours crept by with an unbearable weight. When the pilot's voice came over the speaker again to announce they would begin their descent, Kevin's mind spun with possibilities. How would James react? Would he even recognize Ebony after so many years? Did he have another family now, living somewhere else? The questions burned in Kevin's throat, but he felt powerless to ask them out loud. When they landed and the plane taxied to the gate, Ebony seemed to awaken from a dream. She stood up slowly, waiting for the aisle to clear before grabbing her carry-on. Kevin noticed how her hands shook. He wanted to offer comfort, but he also needed reassurance himself. He followed behind her in silence until they reached the front exit. Standing there, thanking passengers, was a co-pilot and a pair of flight attendants. James Reynolds was nowhere in sight. Ebony hesitated, her lips parted as though she wanted to ask the flight crew something, but at the last moment she rushed down the jet bridge without a word. Kevin felt his stomach plummet. The chance to confront James had vanished in an instant, lost in the shuffle of the departing crowd. Anger flared inside him. He wanted to cry out, to grab Ebony's hand and demand they turn around. But she pressed onward, her eyes hollow, her expression distant. At baggage claim, while they waited for their luggage, Kevin finally blurted out, "Why didn't we stay? Why didn't we wait to talk to him?" His voice came out sharper than he intended, but he couldn't hold it in anymore. Ebony closed her eyes, tears threatening to fall. She whispered, "I'm not sure how. Not yet." Kevin swallowed, his frustration shifting toward empathy. He saw the pain in his mother's eyes. He realized that while he had always carried questions, Ebony had also lived with guilt, heartbreak, and secrets. She was scared. He placed a tentative hand on her arm and said quietly, "We can't leave without answers." She nodded. "We won't," she replied, with a strained attempt at confidence. They gathered their bags and made their way to a nearby motel, the cheapest one Ebony could find. Inside a dimly lit room that smelled of stale coffee, Ebony sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched. Kevin had never seen her this lost. Usually she was the strong, unflappable one. She had raised him on her own, holding down 2 jobs, cooking dinners as best she could, and saving pennies whenever possible. But this moment revealed a vulnerability he hadn't expected. His voice was a gentle question. "When are we going to talk to him?" Ebony inhaled slowly. "I reached out to someone who works with him. A friend who might help arrange something." She paused. "But I don't know if he'll agree to meet us." Kevin felt tears pricking his eyes. "But he's my dad, right?" He phrased it like a question, but deep down he already knew. She nodded, lips pressed together. "Yes, he's your father." Kevin closed his eyes. Hearing it out loud felt both liberating and devastating. He had spent his entire life wondering about this missing piece, and now he was a short distance away from confronting the truth. The motel's flickering lamp cast shadows on the walls, adding to the sense of hovering uncertainty. Ebony placed a reassuring hand on Kevin's cheek. "We'll figure this out," she murmured. The next day dawned slowly. Sunlight peeked through the threadbare curtains, revealing the outdated furniture and the chipped paint of the cramped room. Ebony had barely slept. Dark circles framed her usually warm eyes. She forced a small smile at Kevin, who was still half asleep, curled up on the bed with his backpack by his side. While Kevin got dressed, Ebony made a few phone calls. Kevin couldn't hear all of it, but he caught words like arrangement, flight schedule, and maybe tomorrow. Every moment felt like a test of patience. By mid-morning, Ebony received a text. She read it silently, then turned to Kevin. "He's doing another flight this afternoon. There might be a chance to see him before he goes through security." Kevin's heart pounded. "You mean at the airport again?" She nodded, eyes flickering with a mixture of apprehension and hope. "We'll head there early and wait." The taxi ride back to the airport was a blur of passing buildings and weaving traffic. Ebony drummed her fingers against the seat. Kevin stared out the window, occasionally catching glimpses of families laughing together at bus stops or couples strolling hand in hand. A pang of longing tore at him. He wished his family could be like that, complete. As they approached the airport, Ebony's phone buzzed with another message. She read it quickly, then exhaled sharply. "He's in Terminal B," she said, her voice trembling. "We'll try to meet him at the crew lounge." Inside the terminal, the hustle of travelers, announcements, and rolling suitcases created a symphony of chaos. Ebony led Kevin to a more secluded area near the gates, where airline employees often passed in uniforms. A tall woman with short, stylish hair approached them. She wore a flight attendant's uniform and had an air of reassurance about her. She offered a sympathetic smile. "Ebony?" she asked softly. Ebony nodded, and the woman turned her gaze to Kevin. "He's grown," she remarked, though Kevin had no idea who she was. She extended a hand. "I'm Tanya. Your mom and I went to high school together. I work with James, though we're not on the same flight crew all the time." Kevin shook her hand, swallowing his nerves. Tanya gestured for them to follow her. As they walked past security checkpoints, Ebony explained quietly to Kevin that Tanya had been her classmate, a friend who had ended up working for the same airline as James. Tanya had only recently learned of Ebony's situation. She had agreed to help if possible, but there were limits to what she could do. For instance, James might refuse to meet them. He might be busy. He might already have left. The possibilities gnawed at Kevin's mind. Tanya led them to an out-of-the-way waiting area near the employee entrance, a corridor with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The faint smell of coffee drifted from a nearby break room. Tanya asked them to wait while she checked to see if James was in the lounge. She disappeared through a door, leaving Kevin and Ebony alone in that sterile hallway. Kevin tugged on Ebony's sleeve. "What if he doesn't want to see us?" he murmured, voice trembling. Ebony wrapped an arm around his shoulder. "Then we'll have done what we could," she said, though her voice cracked with uncertainty. "But I need you to know something. No matter what happens, you are my son, and I love you beyond measure." Kevin nodded, eyes stinging with unshed tears. He noticed Ebony's face reflecting his own confusion and longing. This confrontation would be the answer to everything, or it would leave them with the biggest heartbreak of all. A few agonizing minutes later, Tanya returned, her expression guarded. "He's in there," she whispered. "He's about to head to his plane for pre-flight checks. I told him someone was waiting. I didn't mention who." She paused, glancing at Ebony with concern. "You're sure you want to do this now?" Ebony pressed her lips together. "Yes." Tanya nodded and motioned for them to follow. They stepped through the door and into a small lounge area. A row of lockers lined one wall, and a couple of couches faced a TV tuned to a news channel with the volume muted. Standing near a locker, dressed in a crisp pilot's uniform, was James Reynolds. He was taller than Kevin had imagined, with neatly trimmed hair that showed the first hints of gray. His posture radiated a quiet confidence, yet his face showed a flicker of uncertainty as he turned toward them. Ebony froze. Kevin's chest tightened. This was the man he had seen in that faded photograph, only older. James gave a polite smile, one that a professional might offer to a stranger. But then his gaze landed on Ebony's face, and the smile wavered, replaced by shock. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as recognition flickered in his eyes. His brow furrowed, and he took a slow step forward, glancing from Ebony to Kevin. "Ebony." His voice was soft, almost disbelieving. Is that you?" She couldn't speak, her lips trembling. Kevin swallowed and took an uncertain step forward. His eyes darted between his mother and the pilot. For a second, the weight of every unanswered question roared in his mind. The air felt thin, and he struggled to breathe. James glanced at Kevin, an unspoken question behind his eyes. Slowly, Ebony drew in a shaky breath. "James," she managed, her voice little more than a whisper. This is Kevin." James turned his gaze fully on Kevin now, scanning his features as though searching for something familiar. Confusion, fear, and something like hope flickered across his expression. Kevin's heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. With trembling determination, he lifted his chin. "You're my dad," he said, the words burning his tongue and echoing in his ears. His voice cracked, but the statement was clear. James's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He glanced around, realizing Tanya was watching from the doorway. He finally inhaled deeply. "Ebony," he repeated, his voice shaky. "What's going on? You show up after all these years, and Kevin is—" His words trailed off. Ebony blinked back tears. "He's your son," she confirmed. "I tried to reach you before, but I never knew where you were. We lost touch. A lot of time has passed." James's face went pale. He looked at Kevin again, as though he could piece together 12 years of absence simply by staring at the boy's features. Slowly, he stepped toward them. Kevin felt every muscle in his body tense. James swallowed. When? How? He cut himself off, probably realizing it was a foolish question. He pressed a palm to his forehead, trying to steady his emotions. Ebony, why didn't you? She clenched her fists. I tried. After you left for your flight school program, you never came back. You never wrote. I was scared. Alone. You never once answered the few messages I could afford to send. James's expression shifted from confusion to a defensive stance. I moved around. I never got any letters or calls. You have to believe me. His breathing quickened. All these years, I had no idea. A hush fell over them. Tanya, sensing the tension, quietly slipped away. Kevin could feel every strand of his nerve endings tingling. He wanted to shout, cry, and ask 1,000 questions at once. Instead, he found himself standing there, waiting, searching James's face for some sign of acceptance or rejection. James finally turned to Kevin. I didn't know, he said softly. If I'd known, I would have come back. I swear. Kevin's eyes welled with tears. I've been waiting my whole life, he choked out. For a dad I never had. Mom did everything, but... He tried to keep it together, but the tears spilled over. The heartbreak, the longing, and the confusion all mingled into a single moment of vulnerability. James hesitated, pain etched into his features. He gently placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder. I'm so sorry, he whispered. He looked at Ebony, his eyes glistening. I'm so sorry. The moment stretched into silence, charged with raw emotion. Ebony closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. In her heart, perhaps she had wanted to hurt him, to vent years of anger. But seeing James's stricken face, she realized how complicated the past truly was. She parted her lips, but no words emerged. A beep from James's phone startled them. He glanced down, a reminder of his responsibilities. I have to... He trailed off, searching their faces. I have a flight in less than an hour. I can't just... He paused, scanning Ebony's expression. Wait for me after I land tonight. I'm on a short route. I'll be back by 8. Please, just meet me here. Give me a chance to talk to you both. Ebony nodded, her shoulders slumped. Kevin nodded too, tears still wet on his cheeks. There was no telling if James was being sincere or if old wounds and secrets would tear them apart. But for now, it was enough to know that James wanted to continue this conversation. He squeezed Kevin's shoulder once more before hurrying out, the echo of his footsteps marking the start of a new kind of uncertainty. Afterward, Ebony and Kevin found themselves back in the corridor, leaning against the wall as if their legs might give out. Tanya approached quietly. I didn't mean to overhear, she murmured, but I'm sorry. I wish I'd known earlier. Ebony managed a faint smile. Thank you, she whispered. We'll come back tonight. He said he'd meet us. Tanya nodded. I'll do what I can to make sure he has the time and space to talk. I know this is... She stopped herself from saying more, recognizing that words couldn't fix what had already happened. Kevin spent the rest of the day with Ebony in the airport's waiting area. Neither felt like sightseeing or exploring the city. They found a quiet corner near a row of unused gates. Ebony dozed fitfully, and Kevin scribbled in a small notebook he carried, trying to capture every thought swirling in his mind. He wrote about the sound of James's voice, the look in his eyes, the trembling apology. A part of him feared that James would vanish again, this time with no photograph or memory to cling to. As the hours crawled by, Ebony bought them something to eat, though neither had much appetite. Kevin tried to reassure her with small talk, but she remained on edge, repeatedly checking her phone for any missed messages. At a certain point, it dawned on Kevin that James could simply change his mind. He might decide it was all too complicated, too messy. The fear churned in his stomach, making the already bland airport food sit uneasily. Finally, night fell, and the bustling crowds thinned. Flight announcements echoed through the nearly empty terminal. Ebony's phone buzzed, a text from Tanya. "He's landed and will meet you at gate 12. Ebony exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. Kevin stood quickly, stuffing his notebook into his backpack. Together, they made their way to the appointed gate, hearts pounding in unison. James was there, leaning against a pillar, a garment bag slung over his arm. He looked as though he hadn't had a moment's rest. The lines on his face were deeper, and his eyes seemed haunted. He straightened when he saw them. Kevin's pulse raced. The father he had only met for moments earlier was now standing in front of him again, as though they were reuniting after a short separation rather than meeting for the first time in 12 years. James set his garment bag down. He waited for them to approach, then quietly led them to a more private area near the windows overlooking the tarmac. The silence held a kind of gravity. He gestured to a couple of chairs. Ebony settled into one, and Kevin sat stiffly in the other. James remained standing for a moment, staring at them as if trying to memorize every detail. He finally sat down too, releasing a long, trembling breath. He looked at Ebony. "I want to know everything," he said softly. "I feel like I've lost a whole lifetime, and His voice broke. "I still can't believe this is real." Ebony nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Where do I begin?" She raked a hand through her hair. "Do you remember the last time we spoke? You were headed to that advanced flight school in another state. You said you'd come back." James nodded, his gaze distant. "I remember. I got an offer to train with a big airline. Everything happened so fast. I assumed it was my shot to make a better life. I always meant to write, but weeks turned into months. Then I tried calling once, but your number had changed." He shook his head. "I should have tried harder." Ebony's voice quivered. "I was scared. I was pregnant and my mom was sick. I wrote to your last address, but the letter came back. Then my dad lost his job and we had to move. The phone bill went unpaid." She shrugged helplessly. "I couldn't even afford to track you down. And after a while, I thought you just didn't want to be found." James's eyes flickered with pain. "I would have come," he insisted. "If I had known, I would have been there." His gaze shifted to Kevin, who shrank under the intensity of the moment. "I'm sorry I missed your birth. Your first steps, your birthdays. All of it." Kevin forced himself to meet James's eyes. "Are you sorry for me or for yourself?" he asked suddenly, surprising even himself. He felt Ebony stiffen beside him. But he couldn't hold it in. He needed honesty. He'd spent too long wishing for a father, longing for someone to toss a ball with, to guide him, to be there at recitals or school plays. "You weren't there," he continued, voice wavering with heartbreak. "I just want to know if you're sorry because you missed out on fatherhood, or if you're just guilty that you never knew I existed." James inhaled slowly, tears glinting in his eyes. "I'm sorry for both," he murmured, voice husky. "I missed out on being your dad, on seeing you grow, and I feel guilty because if I'd done more, we wouldn't be here now, trying to piece this together in an airport." Emotions rippled through Kevin. He didn't know how to respond to that. Part of him wanted to rage at James for abandoning them. Another part desperately wanted to forgive and start anew. He searched Ebony's face for guidance. She offered a tearful smile and squeezed his hand. James shifted in his seat, arms resting on his thighs. "How do I make this right?" he asked softly, looking from Ebony to Kevin. "I can't go back in time, but I can't walk away from this." A long silence followed. Ebony glanced at Kevin, who was staring down at his shoes. "We don't know," she admitted quietly. "We only came because Kevin deserves answers. But we're not sure how to move forward." James swallowed hard. "Let me at least try. I want to be in your life, Kevin. I know it's going to take time to build any kind of relationship, but please let me try." Kevin felt a wave of emotions crash over him. Relief, doubt, yearning, fear. He managed a nod, tears slipping down his cheeks. "All I wanted was a dad," he whispered. "I don't even know what that looks like." James gently placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder. "We can figure it out together," he said, voice thick with emotion. "If you'll let me." Ebony cleared her throat. "Where are you staying tonight?" she asked James, her tone cautious. "We're at a motel, but it's not exactly comfortable." James's brow furrowed. "I'm staying with a friend near the airport. My place is in another city, about an hour away. But I have an idea." He glanced at his phone. "I can probably get us a small hotel suite here in the airport's attached hotel, at least for tonight, so we can talk more without all these people around." He gestured to the passers-by, a few of whom were glancing curiously in their direction. Ebony exchanged a look with Kevin. She nodded slowly. "If that's what you want to do," she said, her voice still filled with caution. James stood. "I'll arrange it. You stay right here. I'll be back." He hurried off, leaving Ebony and Kevin in the same chairs near the window. They watched him go, his steps brisk with purpose. Ebony rubbed her temples. "I never thought we'd be here," she whispered to Kevin. "You okay?" Kevin shrugged, tears threatening again. "I guess. It's just a lot. He seems sincere, Mom. I don't want to get hurt." She pulled him into a comforting hug, resting her chin on his head. "I know. Me too." They waited in tense silence until James returned with a keycard and a fresh sense of determination. He led them to the airport hotel, navigating the winding hallways until they reached a quiet suite. Inside was a small living area with a pull-out couch, a bedroom, and a simple kitchenette. It was no palace, but it felt more private. Kevin noticed Ebony exhale as though a weight was lifted the moment the door clicked shut behind them. James set down his garment bag and turned back to them. "Please, make yourselves comfortable. I'll order some food. Anything you want." Ebony shook her head. "We're fine," she said softly. "We ate earlier." Kevin, though, was too anxious to eat anyway. He sank onto the couch, glancing around, trying to reconcile the swirl of emotions in his mind. He watched James and Ebony navigate polite conversation. They were awkward, stumbling over words, once so close and now virtual strangers. James apologized repeatedly, and Ebony tried to explain the struggles she faced raising Kevin alone. Their voices were hushed, heavy with sorrow for lost years. Kevin listened, occasionally asking small questions: where James had lived, if he ever tried to come back, why Ebony hadn't borrowed money from someone to track him down. But after a few hours, exhaustion overtook them. James offered the bed to Ebony and Kevin, insisting he'd sleep on the couch. Ebony hesitated, but Kevin was already nodding off, emotionally drained. She finally agreed. None of them felt comfortable enough to part ways so soon. The unspoken fear was that if they left, they might never speak again. Kevin drifted into a fitful sleep. The last thing he remembered was the muffled sound of James whispering apologies to Ebony across the room. Morning arrived softly, light filtering through the curtains. Kevin woke to find James already up, sitting near the window in uniform pants and a casual shirt. He was sipping coffee, staring at the rising sun over the tarmac. Ebony still slept in the bed, wrapped in blankets, breathing deeply. Kevin hesitated, then approached James, who looked up with a small, uncertain smile. "Morning," James said. "Sorry if I woke you." Kevin shook his head. "I was already awake." An awkward pause settled. Kevin cleared his throat. "So, do you have a flight today?" James nodded. "Later this afternoon, but I'd like to spend time with you both before I go. My schedule for the next few days is flexible. Maybe I can come visit you if you're staying around?" Kevin considered it. Well, we don't live anywhere near here. We'd have to figure something out." A thought struck him. "We don't have money for more motel nights. We came here just so we could see you. Mom spent nearly everything she had on these plane tickets." James's eyes flickered with guilt. He glanced at Ebony, who was stirring. "I'm responsible for this." "Let me help. At least let me pay for you to stay somewhere better." Kevin shrugged. "That's between you and Mom." Ebony stretched and sat up, running a hand through her hair. She locked eyes with James, still uncertain. He offered her a gentle smile, though it was tinged with sorrow. "Morning," she said quietly. They talked about logistics. Ebony had only planned a 2-night stay at the motel, with no concrete plan for what would happen if they actually found James. She had half expected to be rejected or ignored. Now that James was here, she wasn't sure how to accept his offer to help. Pride warred with necessity. Eventually, she agreed to let him cover a few more nights at a better place, at least until they could figure out next steps. Before checkout time, they gathered their belongings. James made a quick call to the front desk to handle the arrangements. As they packed up, Ebony checked her phone and found a couple of missed calls from their hometown. She stepped aside to return them, leaving Kevin alone with James in the quiet suite. Kevin fidgeted. "This is weird, right?" he finally asked. James nodded. "It's a lot to take in." Kevin hesitated, voice hushed. Did you think about Mom? About the life you left behind?" James sighed. "Many times," he confessed. "But so much changed so fast. At first I was overwhelmed with training, traveling, new responsibilities. Then I met new people, moved cities. I told myself, when I settle down, I'll go back. I'll call Ebony. But I never settled. Then I felt so guilty that more time had passed. I convinced myself maybe it was best to leave the past in the past, that maybe she'd moved on and was happy without me. I had no idea about you." Kevin absorbed the words, processing the regret that laced James's tone. "Do you have another family?" he blurted. James paused. "No," he said quietly. "I dated here and there, but never had kids, never married, always on the move. That's part of being a pilot. I'm hardly in one place for more than a few days at a time." He ran a hand over his face. "Now I realize I had a family all along. A family I abandoned, even if I didn't mean to." Kevin nodded, torn between empathy and anger. Ebony rejoined them, biting her lip. "We should go," she said. "We'll let housekeeping do their job." They checked out and walked through the busy lobby. James helped Ebony with her bags, an action that felt strange to her after all the years she had been self-reliant. Together, they found a nearby diner to get breakfast. Kevin sat across from James in a booth, an impossible swirl of emotions playing in his mind. While waiting for their food, Ebony asked James about possible flight schedules, how often he was in their city, and what his next few routes looked like. James glanced at his phone. "I can adjust my schedule a bit, switch with someone, or maybe take some personal days. This is important to me." He paused. "But I don't want to disrupt your life more than I already have." Ebony let out a joyless laugh. "Our life is always disrupted. We manage. Don't worry about that." They ate in subdued quiet, the tension thick. Kevin pushed his food around on the plate, pretending to have an appetite. Afterward, James escorted them to a better hotel near the airport. He insisted on paying for several nights, handing over his credit card at the front desk without hesitation. Ebony watched him with a mixture of relief and self-consciousness. She mumbled a thank you, her eyes downcast. James had to leave soon for his next flight, so they found a quiet corner in the lobby to say goodbye. He turned to Kevin, his expression pleading. "Can I call you later? Maybe we can do something when I'm done." Kevin nodded, then realized he didn't actually have a phone of his own. Ebony gave James her phone number. He typed it in, confirming it twice, as though terrified to lose that connection. He looked at Ebony. "I promise I won't disappear again. I need you to believe that." She swallowed, nodding slowly, though trust was a fragile thing. James seemed to sense her uncertainty. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook and pen, scribbling down his contact information, including an address. He tore out the page and handed it to Ebony. "If I don't call, or if you need anything, use this, day or night." Ebony took it, eyes flicking over the scrawled writing. "Okay." With that, James gave a last, longing glance at Kevin, then headed out. Kevin watched him go, feeling like he was in a dream. A father he had never known had suddenly appeared, only to vanish again into the crowd, carrying with him all the regrets and hopes that wouldn't fit neatly in a suitcase. Back in their new hotel room, Ebony collapsed onto one of the beds, covering her face with her hands. Kevin set down his backpack, approached, and placed a tentative hand on her shoulder. She peered up at him, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have done more to find him. Kevin shook his head. "Don't blame yourself. I don't blame you. You did everything you could." She nodded, but a trace of guilt lingered on her face. Kevin decided to let it go. Arguing about blame wouldn't change anything now. Instead, he changed the subject. "We have a few days here, right? At least we're not stuck in that old motel." Ebony tried to smile. "Yes, thanks to James." Kevin perched on the edge of the bed, swinging his legs. "What do you think happens next?" Ebony sighed, sitting up. "I don't know. But for now, we'll wait. He said he'd call, and we'll see if he keeps his word." She hesitated. "It's scary, trusting him. But for your sake, I want to." Kevin understood. A new chapter of his life was opening, full of questions. What if James came through for them? Could Ebony and James ever fix what was broken? Could Kevin accept him as a father if he was constantly flying from place to place? The hours passed slowly. Ebony napped fitfully, phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Kevin tried to distract himself with television, flipping through channels that all seemed the same. By evening, the phone finally rang. Ebony jolted awake, fumbling to answer. Kevin watched her face as she spoke. Her tense features slowly softened. She uttered small acknowledgments like, "Yes." "Uh-huh. We can do that." "Okay." She ended the call and looked at Kevin with an unreadable expression. "He wants to meet us for dinner after his flight lands," she said. "He said he'd call again with the location once he's sure of his arrival time." Kevin exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "So, he didn't vanish," he murmured, feeling a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. Ebony nodded. "No, he didn't." They readied themselves, each lost in their own thoughts. Kevin took a shower, letting the warm water rush over him, hoping it would wash away the knots of anxiety in his stomach. He thought about how different his life might have been if James had always been around. Would he still be the same person? Would his mom have struggled so hard to pay bills, to keep them afloat? Would he have more confidence, have found some direction in life? By the time he emerged, Ebony was smoothing down her shirt in front of the mirror, combing out her hair with unsteady hands. There was a faint glow in her cheeks, as though old emotions were resurfacing, along with old pains. Kevin offered her a small, encouraging nod. She smiled back, though her eyes remained shadowed with doubt. A few hours later, James called again. He suggested a restaurant near the airport, someplace casual but quiet enough to talk. Ebony hesitated. She had never been to such a place, but James insisted it was nothing fancy, and he wanted them to be comfortable. Ebony agreed, and they hurried downstairs to catch a taxi. The restaurant was dimly lit, with booths lining the walls and tables spaced out under soft yellow lamps. James arrived a few minutes after they did, out of uniform now, dressed in a simple collared shirt and slacks. He approached their table, an uncertain smile on his face, carrying the weight of a father trying to reconnect with the family he lost. Kevin slid into the booth next to Ebony, leaving the seat across from them for James. A friendly waitress came by, leaving menus and filling their glasses with water. For a moment, none of them spoke. The silence was thick with too many emotions. Finally, James cleared his throat. "How was your day?" Ebony shrugged. "Quiet, mostly. We stayed at the hotel." He nodded, then looked at Kevin. "You okay?" Kevin fiddled with his napkin. "Yeah, just nervous." James reached across the table, but he stopped short of actually touching Kevin's hand. "I understand. I'm nervous too, but I want us to get past that. I want to learn about you, Kevin. Your favorite things, your dreams, everything." Kevin felt a cautious warmth at those words. Well, I like to draw," he offered timidly. "Mom says I'm pretty good at it. I used to draw planes a lot, even though I didn't know." James's eyes shone with emotion. "You like planes?" Kevin nodded. "Yeah, I always thought they were a way to go somewhere new, start fresh." James blinked, trying to compose himself. "Well, maybe I can show you a real cockpit sometime, if that's okay with your mom." Ebony looked at Kevin and then at James. "That would be nice," she said quietly. They ordered simple meals. Conversation stuttered between small talk about the city, Ebony's job at a small printing shop back home, Kevin's school, and James's experience traveling around the world. He told them about the cities he had visited: Paris, Tokyo, Rio de Janeiro. He explained that it wasn't always glamorous, as jet lag and constant hotel rooms got lonely. Kevin seized the moment. "Did you ever think you'd want a family before you knew about me?" James considered it. "I guess I assumed I'd settle down someday," he admitted. "But the older I got, the more I buried myself in work, trying to outrun regrets. I told myself I'd missed my chance for something real." He glanced at Ebony, sorrow flickering in his gaze. "But now I know there was something real all along." Ebony's grip on her fork tightened. She kept her voice steady. "We've gotten by," she said. "But it wasn't easy. Kevin deserves better." James exhaled. "I wish I could undo it. If you'll let me, I want to help now. Not just with money, but everything else. Guidance, support, love. If it's not too late." Kevin looked at Ebony, noticing tears welling in her eyes. He knew she was thinking about how she had struggled alone, working double shifts, skipping meals so he could have enough, never once complaining. Now, the man whose absence caused all that hardship was offering to help. Could they trust him? Did they have a choice? The tension in the booth grew. James seemed to notice and changed the topic slightly, describing a small program the airline offered for families of pilots, a discounted pass. He said Kevin and Ebony could visit him more easily if they wanted. Ebony listened, her expression guarded. Kevin, however, felt a flicker of excitement. The possibility of traveling somewhere new thrilled him, even though he worried about the cost of trusting James again. After dinner, James walked them outside. The night air was warm and the streetlights glowed softly. Cars rumbled by. James hesitated on the curb, searching for the right words. "Can I drive you to the hotel?" he asked quietly. Ebony shook her head. "We took a taxi. It's late. You should rest. You probably have an early flight." James studied her, sadness in his eyes. "I don't mind. But if you prefer a taxi, okay. Can I see you tomorrow? I have a layover before my next flight the day after." Ebony shrugged, looking at Kevin. Kevin bit his lip and gave a tentative nod. "Sure." James's face brightened with relief. "Okay, I'll text you in the morning." He paused, looking as though he wanted to hug them both, but the moment felt too fragile. Instead, he stepped back and raised a hand in farewell. Ebony flagged down a taxi, and they slipped inside. As the vehicle pulled away, Kevin stole a final glance at James, standing on the sidewalk with regret and hope battling in his eyes. Later that night, in the silent hotel room, Ebony paced while Kevin sat on the bed. She seemed restless, her emotions vibrating off the walls. Kevin recognized that look. She was overwhelmed, struggling to keep her composure. He put his arms around her, and she sank into his embrace. "We can't pretend the past didn't happen," she murmured. "He hurt us, even if he didn't know." Kevin nodded against her shoulder. "I know, but I need to try. I've always wondered about him." She cradled the back of his head. "I understand. We'll see how it goes." The next morning arrived with a sense of cautious optimism. James texted Ebony, asking if they'd like to have breakfast or explore the city together. Ebony hesitated, but Kevin pleaded, so she agreed. They met James in the lobby where he already had a car waiting. He opened the passenger door for Ebony, who paused before getting in, uncertain about letting him take control. Finally, she slid in, and Kevin climbed into the back seat. They drove to a nearby park with a view of the skyline. James pointed out local landmarks as if giving a tour. He seemed determined to bridge the gap created by years of separation in a single morning. Kevin asked questions about different buildings, and James explained how he recognized some from the air. Ebony listened quietly, occasionally offering a comment about how different it all was from their small hometown. Eventually, they parked near a cozy cafe. Inside, the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee wrapped around them. The three found a table by the window. James ordered coffee for himself, hot chocolate for Kevin, and tea for Ebony, remembering her old preference. She offered a small, surprised smile at that. At least he had remembered something from their past. They spoke softly. James told Kevin stories of near-empty flights in the middle of the night and unexpected turbulence that tested his nerves. Kevin was wide-eyed, fascinated by the behind-the-scenes world of aviation. Even Ebony seemed interested, though her gaze occasionally darkened when she remembered the cost of James's career on their lives. Yet she didn't voice her resentment. Perhaps she was too tired to fight. Perhaps she saw how desperately Kevin needed this connection. They decided to walk around the park afterward. It was a pleasant day, the sun filtering through leafy branches. Families strolled with children, couples jogged, and dogs chased frisbees in the grass. The three of them meandered along a winding path, the atmosphere thick with unspoken feelings. James leaned toward Kevin, pointing out a mother bird feeding her chicks in a tree. Kevin smiled, fascinated by small wonders of nature. Ebony trailed behind, letting them have that moment. Eventually, Kevin noticed Ebony had hung back, so he slowed until she caught up. James walked a few steps ahead, turning occasionally as if afraid they might disappear. Ebony whispered to Kevin, "Are you okay?" Kevin nodded. "Yeah, it's weird, but good weird. I like hearing about his job, about places he's been. Makes me want to see the world." Ebony managed a small smile. "You deserve that chance." James glanced over his shoulder, then waited for them to join him. Together they continued, occasionally stopping to watch squirrels scurry or to admire a fountain. It almost felt like a fragile version of a family outing, though each of them knew the undercurrent of pain simmering beneath the surface. After a while, Ebony sat on a bench, looking worn. Kevin perched beside her. James stood, hands in his pockets, unsure whether to join them or give them space. The moment felt heavy. Finally, Ebony patted the bench, inviting James to sit. He obliged, folding his long frame onto the seat next to her. Kevin watched them both, tension building in his chest. James cleared his throat. "Ebony, I know it's not my place to ask, but how have you been? Really?" She hesitated. "It's been hard. My parents tried to help, but they had their own struggles. My father passed away a few years ago. My mother still lives back home, but she isn't well. Kevin and I manage." James nodded, sorrow flashing in his eyes. "I'm sorry." Ebony pressed her lips together. "I know." They lapsed into silence. Kevin stared at the fountain where a child tossed breadcrumbs to ducks. He wondered if, in another life, that could have been him with James by his side. He glanced up just in time to notice James gently reach for Ebony's hand. She froze, surprise flickering across her face. James pulled back. "I'm sorry, old habit." Ebony's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, then turned guarded. "We can't pick up where we left off." James nodded, gaze lowered. "I understand." They decided to head back to the hotel. James had a flight early the next morning, and Ebony said she needed to figure out finances for their stay. Tension weighed heavy in the car. Kevin tried to lighten the mood by asking random questions about James's travels, but the conversation remained stilted. That evening, James joined them for dinner at a family-friendly restaurant near the hotel. Kevin felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, excitement that his father was there and frustration at the underlying tension. Ebony tried to be polite, but years of anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. James was earnest, apologizing again and again, trying to show he was serious about being part of their lives. At the end of the meal, Ebony finally blurted, "Stop apologizing every other sentence. It doesn't fix anything." James looked stricken. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words died in his throat. Kevin glanced at his mother, bracing for an argument. Instead, she just exhaled, pushing her plate away. "I mean," she continued more softly, "just be here, okay? Do something, instead of saying sorry all the time." James's shoulders relaxed. "You're right. I'm sorry." He caught himself, wincing. Kevin almost laughed at the irony. James let out a soft laugh too, an awkward chuckle that showed how fragile the situation was. They parted ways in the lobby. James said he'd text them once he landed at his next destination and promised to call regularly. Ebony nodded curtly, and Kevin mustered a small wave goodbye. The next morning, James was gone. Kevin felt an ache in his chest as he woke to the realization that the man he had only just begun to know was away again. Ebony paced, uncertain about how long they could afford to stay in the city, even with James's help. She didn't want to rely on him entirely. She didn't want to feel beholden or guilty. Yet Kevin could see in her eyes that she too felt a glimmer of possibility. James did call, He texted photos of the plane he was flying, images of sunsets from the cockpit. He asked Kevin about his day and listened patiently when Kevin vented about missing school or wanting to see more of the city. Over the next week, Ebony and Kevin lingered at the hotel. James covered the expenses, calling it his responsibility. Ebony disliked accepting his money, but she also realized it might be the only way for Kevin to build a bond with his father without them rushing back home. Days turned into a small routine. Ebony and Kevin visited libraries, strolled around the city, talked quietly about what they might do. James periodically arrived between flights, taking them out, showing them places he thought they might like. He tried to engage Kevin in fatherly activities, such as going to a sports store to buy him a basketball. Kevin felt awkward but touched by the gesture. In the evenings, Ebony would talk to James about the practicalities of co-parenting from afar: school, medical needs, emergencies. James listened intently, apologizing far less than before, focusing on what he could do now. They faced challenges. At times, Ebony's frustration exploded, especially regarding finances. She hated feeling dependent. Other times, Kevin stormed off, overwhelmed by his own confusion. James, unsure of how to handle fatherhood, stumbled. He occasionally overcompensated, offering expensive gifts or grand suggestions, not realizing Ebony and Kevin valued genuine connection more than material things. Conflict simmered, but so did hope. One evening, after James returned from a flight, they gathered in the hotel lounge. The conversation meandered until James brought up a possibility. "I have enough seniority to request a base transfer closer to your hometown. It might mean less travel for me, or at least a more predictable schedule." He looked at Ebony, his tone earnest. "I'd get an apartment or house there, try to be around for Kevin." Ebony stiffened. "That's a big step." James nodded. "I know. I can't just barge in, but I'm trying to show I'm committed to being his father." Kevin's chest tightened. He wanted that. He desperately wanted a real father, someone who would be there at least more than once a month. He turned to Ebony, eyes pleading. "Maybe we could try?" Ebony examined their faces, torn. Finally, she sighed. "If that's what you want. But don't make promises you can't keep." James met her gaze. "I'll do my best." Not everything was smooth. One afternoon, they encountered a group of people near the hotel giving them curious stares. Kevin couldn't help but notice. He was a young black boy, Ebony a black woman, and James a white man. Some passers-by offered quick, judgmental glances. Kevin felt self-conscious. He caught Ebony's look of discomfort. James eventually noticed too, frowning. He gently placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder. "We look different, and some people can't handle that," James said softly. "But I'm proud to be seen with you, son." The simple statement touched Kevin, who nodded, trying to ignore the creeping sense of inadequacy those glances stirred in him. Ebony, noticing the exchange, squeezed Kevin's hand. "We're used to people's stares," she said under her breath. James nodded, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. He hadn't fully considered the racial bias Ebony and Kevin lived with every day. In his profession, he traveled the world, encountering many cultures. But he never had to deal with the pointed stares, the microaggressions Ebony likely faced as a single black mother raising a biracial son. He tightened his arm around Kevin's shoulders, silently vowing to do better. That night, Ebony recounted a story to James. "When Kevin was 8, he asked me if his father was dead. Kids at school teased him, said if he didn't have a dad, then maybe the man was gone." She paused, voice quivering with a mix of anger and sadness. "I remember him crying, and I didn't know what to say, how to explain your absence. I told him you were a pilot, traveling far away." She glanced at Kevin, then fixed James with a firm stare. "I never lied to him. I never said you didn't exist." James lowered his head, swallowing hard. "Thank you for that. I'm sorry he went through that." Ebony nodded. "It hasn't always been easy. People said things, hurtful things. They saw me, a black woman raising a mixed-race child alone, and assumed the worst. I tried to shield Kevin from it, but I couldn't do it completely." Kevin looked away, blinking back tears. He hadn't told James about the time he was called names at school because of his background, or how kids implied his father didn't want him because of his race. Even now, he wasn't sure he wanted to share those memories, not while everything felt so delicate. James sensed the weight of their words. "All I can do," he said softly, "is apologize and try to be there now. I want to understand what you've been through. I want to make up for it, though I know I can never erase it." They fell silent. That single conversation opened James's eyes to the complexity of the life Ebony and Kevin had led. The next day, he arranged for Ebony and Kevin to meet him at the airport again. He had pulled some strings, receiving permission to show Kevin the cockpit of the plane he was about to fly. Ebony allowed it cautiously, staying nearby. Kevin's face lit up when James let him peek at the controls, all the flashing lights and dials. A few flight attendants smiled encouragingly, sensing the significance of the moment. Kevin tried to conceal his excitement, but it shone through. James explained a few basic instruments, how the plane's altitude and speed were monitored. Kevin asked about the radio system, how James communicated with air traffic control. For a moment, everything else faded, and Kevin reveled in the newfound bond. Ebony watched from the aisle, arms folded, tears glistening. Perhaps she remembered all the dreams Kevin once shared of flying away to find his dad. Before James started his pre-flight check, he motioned for Ebony to join them. She stepped forward cautiously. He gestured at the pilot's seat. "Want to sit?" he asked gently. She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "I'm good." But Kevin, noticing the rare softness in her eyes, suspected she was holding back the urge to let herself feel the wonder of that moment. She had spent so long building walls of self-reliance. Now, with James here, those walls wavered. After they left the plane, James walked them to a quiet corner of the terminal. "Thank you for coming," he told Ebony. "I want to keep doing things like this. I want Kevin to know he's welcome in my world." Ebony met his gaze. "We appreciate it," she said softly, even if her voice was tinged with caution. He had to board soon, so he embraced Kevin. It was an awkward hug, but the warmth of it lingered in Kevin's mind. Then James turned to Ebony, hesitated, and finally offered a gentle hug as well. She allowed it, though her posture remained tense. When he walked away, Ebony and Kevin watched him blend into the crowd of airport personnel. Kevin exhaled shakily, hugging his backpack to his chest. He felt a cautious joy at the prospect that maybe, just maybe, he could have a real dad. They returned to their hotel. Ebony flopped onto a chair. "He's trying," she said quietly. Kevin's eyes flickered with hope. "Isn't that good?" She nodded, though her expression was layered with complexity. I don't know how to let go of the anger, or if I even should." Kevin understood. He was angry too, in a sense, but the part of him that longed for a father overshadowed that. "We'll figure it out," he whispered, uncertain. Over the next few weeks, they continued to navigate the fragile bridge between lost time and a potential future. James applied for a base transfer, updating Ebony and Kevin on each step of the process. He texted them daily, even if just to check in. Sometimes Ebony responded curtly, other times more warmly. Kevin often texted back excited questions about planes or shared random details of his day. James answered with patience and curiosity, trying to establish a fatherly role from hundreds of miles away. Finally, James announced that his transfer had been approved. He could be based at an airport closer to Ebony and Kevin's hometown. It meant he would find an apartment nearby and possibly see them weekly. Ebony looked stunned. Kevin was thrilled. That same day, Ebony made a decision. They couldn't stay in that city hotel forever. She and Kevin needed to go home, return to their life, their responsibilities. They packed up. James flew in specifically to help them with the trip home. He rented a car, and together they loaded Ebony and Kevin's belongings, plus the gifts and souvenirs James had lavished on Kevin. They set off on the drive, Ebony in the passenger seat, Kevin in the back. The conversation was sparse at first, as Ebony stared out the window, dreading the reactions of neighbors and friends. She knew the gossip that would swirl. Ebony left to chase down her son's father, who had abandoned them. Now he'd come back. People would talk. Kevin leaned forward between the seats. "Mom, it's okay," he said softly, sensing her nerves. She forced a smile. "I know." They arrived in the late afternoon, pulling up to their modest home. It needed a coat of paint, and the yard was overgrown in places, signs of Ebony's constant juggling of jobs. She glanced apologetically at James, but he gave her a warm, appreciative look. "It's nice," he said sincerely. "It's yours." Ebony swallowed. "Yes, ours." They lugged the bags inside. The interior was cramped, but Ebony and Kevin had made it comfortable. A few faded family pictures hung on the wall. Kevin's drawings taped here and there. James surveyed it all, quietly absorbing the life he had missed. He lingered on a photograph of Ebony holding a toddler-aged Kevin, beaming with pride. His eyes glistened. "Thank you for letting me see this," he whispered. Ebony nodded, folding her arms. The tension returned as she realized he was now stepping into the domain where she had fought so hard to provide. James set down the bags and turned to Ebony. "I'm going to find a place nearby as soon as I can," he told her. "I'd love to come by and help with anything you need. Groceries, bills, house repairs. Whatever." Ebony bristled slightly. "I've managed all these years," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, the roof leaked in places, the plumbing acted up, and the stack of unpaid bills weighed on her desk. She chewed her lip, the fight draining from her. "But maybe we can talk about it," she relented. Kevin watched them, heart pounding. This moment felt pivotal. James offered Ebony a gentle smile. Of course. A short time later, Ebony cooked a simple meal, rice, beans, and some leftover chicken. James offered to help, but she waved him away, tension rolling off her. He watched her from a distance, noticing the broken tiles on the counter and the chipped plates. It was a harsh reminder of how life had battered her. He walked over and quietly helped Kevin set the small table, trying not to intrude. They ate in silence. Finally, Ebony cleared her throat. "We don't have a spare room," she said, an unspoken question lingering in the statement. James took the hint. "I'll grab a hotel in town for tonight. First thing in the morning, I'll look at some rentals. I have a few leads already." Ebony nodded, not meeting his gaze. Kevin sighed, tension coiling in his chest. He could see how desperately James wanted to stay, to be a part of their routine, but Ebony's walls were still high. After dinner, they showed James out. He stood on the porch, the fading daylight casting shadows across his face. He looked at the small front yard, the street of modest houses. He turned to Ebony and Kevin. "I'll text you both," he said softly. "I'm so grateful to have found you again." Ebony mustered a small nod. Kevin tugged at the hem of James's shirt. "Can you come by tomorrow?" he asked hopefully. James knelt to Kevin's eye level. "If your mom says it's okay, absolutely." Kevin glanced at Ebony, who gave a terse nod. James leaned forward and pulled Kevin into a hug. "Take care, son," he whispered. Kevin felt a lump in his throat at the word son. After James left, Ebony and Kevin retreated inside. She looked exhausted, but also strangely relieved, as if a storm she had feared for years had finally begun to pass. The next morning, James returned, coffee cups in hand. Ebony accepted one cautiously, the tension still palpable. But Kevin noticed something softer in her demeanor. She asked James about his plan for rentals. He detailed a few places nearby and invited them to come look with him. They spent the day driving around, checking out small apartments and a couple of modest houses. Ebony offered practical comments about rental prices, proximity to Kevin's school, and safe neighborhoods. James listened intently, crossing off places that didn't meet Ebony's criteria. Finally, they found a small 2-bedroom apartment near the edge of town, quiet and unassuming. Ebony nodded slowly. "It's close to the bus route for the airport, and Kevin could get here easily if he wanted to." James signed a short-term lease on the spot, ignoring Ebony's attempts to question the cost. He insisted it was necessary for building a life here. She fell silent, conceding the point. Kevin followed them around, mind swirling with the realization that James was truly setting roots in a town he had once abandoned. Could this be real? A few days passed as James settled in. He purchased basic furniture, a couch, a small table, a bed. Ebony helped with suggestions, though she maintained an emotional distance. Kevin visited, exploring the space with cautious curiosity. James invited them over for a simple dinner one evening, fumbling in the kitchenette to prepare something edible. Ebony offered to help, but James insisted he wanted to handle it. The meal turned out slightly burnt, but they all forced a laugh, the tension easing just a little. One night, James accompanied Kevin and Ebony to the grocery store. While shopping, they encountered a few neighbors, some of whom recognized Ebony. She introduced James politely, receiving curious glances. Kevin felt uneasy, suspecting that gossip would spread like wildfire, but Ebony held her head high, ignoring the whispers. She had survived far too much to be cowed now. Over the following weeks, James started picking Kevin up from school when he wasn't on a flight. Sometimes he dropped Ebony at work if it fit his schedule. At first, Ebony insisted on taking the bus, but eventually she relented, mostly to save money. Slowly, they formed a routine that, while disjointed, resembled a fractured family trying to piece itself together. James also began to notice the structural issues with Ebony's house. He offered to fix small things, leaky faucets, broken window latches. She finally allowed him to do so, grudgingly appreciative. Kevin noticed that each completed fix softened Ebony's heart just a bit more, yet underlying tensions remained. One evening, James approached Kevin in his small bedroom, stepping over scattered drawings and school books. Kevin looked up warily from his desk. "What's up?" James closed the door behind him. "I wanted to talk about something serious. How do you feel about me seeing you so often? I know this is a big change." Kevin fiddled with a pencil. "It's good. I like it," he admitted, but his voice was tight. "I'm just scared you'll leave again." James's gaze fell. "I understand. I can't promise things will always be perfect, but I'm not going to disappear. I need you to believe that." Kevin held his breath, emotions knotting in his chest. "I want to believe it," he whispered. "I just don't know if I can yet." James rested a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder. "That's fair," he said softly. "Give it time." Over the next month, life settled into a new rhythm. James juggled flight schedules, sometimes gone for 2 or 3 days, then returning and spending most of his free hours with Kevin. He tried to respect Ebony's space, occasionally inviting her to dinner but not pushing. Kevin sensed that Ebony was thawing, if only slightly. She saw James's consistent presence, how he never broke a promise to Kevin. Still, she kept her heart guarded, fearful that old wounds would tear open again. One afternoon, James surprised Kevin by picking him up from school and driving him to a nearby sports field. James had bought a baseball glove and ball. "You ever play catch?" he asked. Kevin shrugged. He'd played at school sometimes, but never had anyone to practice with at home. James smiled, leading him onto the field. Nervous excitement rippled through Kevin. He wasn't the most athletic, but the idea of playing catch with his dad felt monumental. James showed him how to hold the ball, how to position his arm. Kevin threw a wild pitch, missing James by several feet. They both laughed. Gradually, Kevin's throws became more accurate. James praised every improvement, voice filled with encouragement. Passers-by watched them, some with warm smiles. Kevin felt a surge of happiness, a sense of belonging he had rarely experienced. As dusk fell, Kevin's arm grew sore, and they headed back to the car. James locked up the equipment, then turned to Kevin, face beaming. "That was fun." Kevin nodded, swallowing a lump of emotion. "Yeah, it was." They drove home, a comfortable silence between them. Kevin glanced out the window, remembering how he'd watched other boys play catch with their fathers, always feeling a pang of envy. Now, that moment was his, 12 years late, but it was his. He hoped it was a sign of more good moments to come. That evening, Ebony noticed the flush of excitement on Kevin's face. James explained their impromptu ball practice, and Ebony nodded slowly, an unreadable look in her eyes. She retreated to her bedroom, needing space to process. Kevin sank onto the couch in the living room, heart brimming with cautious joy. A few days later, they faced an unexpected challenge. Ebony's mother, Laverne, insisted on meeting James. She had heard from neighbors that Ebony was back in town with Kevin and that Kevin's father had resurfaced. Ebony tried to put it off, but Laverne was persistent, so they set a day for James to come over to Laverne's apartment. Ebony feared that old resentments might flare. The day arrived. Kevin was nervous. He adored his grandmother. She had helped raise him, providing babysitting and guidance when Ebony worked multiple jobs. But Laverne could be blunt, and she harbored a protective fierceness for her daughter and grandson. James showed up on time, wearing a neat shirt and a respectful expression. Ebony, Kevin, and James walked up the rickety stairs to Laverne's door. The smell of home-cooked collard greens and cornbread wafted out as soon as Ebony knocked. Laverne opened the door, eyes sweeping over James with a steely gaze. She welcomed them in, stepping aside to let them pass. Kevin entered, stomach flipping. Laverne's living room was small, filled with family photos. A picture of a young Ebony stared back from the mantel. Laverne offered Ebony a hug, then gently patted Kevin's head. Finally, she turned her attention to James, sizing him up. "So," she said curtly, "you're the man who's been gone." James cleared his throat, struggling to maintain composure. Yes, ma'am, James Reynolds. It's good to meet you." Laverne pursed her lips. Good to meet me, is it? After all these years, you just breeze back?" Ebony shot Laverne a warning glance, but the older woman waved her off. Kevin stood there, feeling awkward, but also understanding his grandmother's anger. James nodded respectfully. "I understand your feelings. I can't change the past, but I'm here now, doing my best." Laverne's gaze softened slightly at his tone. She motioned toward the old couch, gesturing for them to sit. Ebony guided Kevin to a seat, and James perched on the edge of a chair. Laverne eased into her own worn recliner. An uncomfortable silence followed. Finally, Laverne asked, "How's your job?" Her tone was clipped, but it was a step toward conversation. James explained he was a pilot, had transferred to be closer, was renting an apartment in town. Laverne arched an eyebrow. "Pilot, huh? You out chasing the sky while Ebony struggled to raise Kevin alone?" Ebony flinched. Kevin cast his eyes downward. James took a steadying breath. "I never knew," he repeated, voice trembling with sincerity. "If I had, I'd have come back. I owe Ebony and Kevin more than I can repay. I'm trying to do right by them now." Laverne stared at him for a long moment. "That's what she says," she murmured, nodding at Ebony. "I'm watching you, though. If you hurt them again—" James lifted his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I understand." Eventually, the tension eased. Laverne served them dinner, eyeing James critically whenever he offered to help. By the end of the meal, she allowed a small smile. Kevin noticed a spark of acceptance in her eyes when she saw James gently praising Ebony's cooking and complimenting Laverne's recipes. Before they left, Laverne even mustered a grudging invitation for James to come by again. Ebony exhaled in relief once they were back outside, thankful that the encounter wasn't a complete disaster. In the following weeks, James made steady efforts to prove his reliability. He consistently picked Kevin up from school, helped Ebony with errands, sometimes dropping by Laverne's to check on her. Kevin watched the transformation with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. He saw Ebony's demeanor shift. She was less guarded, allowing James closer. She still had moments of anger and distrust, but those moments passed more quickly now. As time passed, Kevin began to see James as not just a father figure, but a person with vulnerabilities. He learned about the pressures of James's job, the mental toll of flying so many hours, the loneliness James felt in those years without family. Kevin sympathized, and bit by bit, resentment gave way to empathy. Racial bias in the community occasionally reared its head. Some neighbors wondered if James was just passing through. Others made side comments about Ebony being with a white man. Most people, especially those who knew Ebony, kept opinions to themselves or offered polite curiosity. But Ebony felt the eyes on them whenever they went out together as a family. James noticed too, especially in certain parts of town. Once they were at a local diner, and a patron shot them a pointed, disapproving glare. Ebony stiffened, her jaw set. James gently covered her hand with his eyes conveying solidarity. Kevin bristled, but Ebony squeezed his arm, signaling they shouldn't escalate. They finished their meal and left, but the incident weighed on them. Later, James apologized for not understanding sooner how the world might view them. Despite such challenges, Kevin's life felt brighter. He started inviting James to school functions, like a small talent show where Kevin presented his artwork. James showed up beaming with pride, capturing photos and clapping enthusiastically. Ebony was there too, her eyes glistening at the sight of them side by side. Other parents, noticing the trio, asked polite questions. Kevin felt the newness of it all, but also a sense of belonging he'd never experienced. One pivotal evening, Ebony asked James to come by for dinner. Kevin sensed a shift in his mother's tone. Less hostility, more acceptance. James arrived with groceries, offering to cook. Kevin helped wash vegetables. Ebony watched from the side, occasionally giving pointers, while James fumbled around her kitchen. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, as though something unspoken simmered between Ebony and James. Halfway through preparing the meal, Ebony excused herself to the bedroom, overwhelmed. James looked at Kevin, worry etched on his face. Kevin shrugged, unsure. James continued cooking, but after a few minutes Ebony reemerged, eyes reddened. She walked straight to James, who stood by the stove. Kevin tensed, sensing something important was about to happen. Ebony's voice trembled. "I need to tell you something. All these years I blamed you. I blamed you for not being there, for leaving us. But I never told you how much I loved you, how devastated I was when you didn't come back." She paused, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm still angry, and I'll probably always be, at least a little. But I see you now, what you're doing. And I'm sorry." I'm sorry if I pushed you away without giving you a fair chance to explain. James stared, eyes glistening. He turned off the stove burner, then gently took her hands. Ebony, I love you, he admitted in a choked whisper. I've never stopped. I thought you moved on. Thought you didn't want me. I'm sorry, too, for not trying harder. They stood there, tears mixing with regret and relief. Kevin watched, heart pounding. A cautious warmth spread through him. This was the conversation he had longed to overhear, some semblance of resolution between his parents, a sign that they could truly move forward. James pulled Ebony into a tentative embrace, holding her as she cried softly. Kevin blinked back tears, witnessing a moment he had only fantasized about. They spent the rest of the night talking, opening old wounds, explaining misunderstandings. Kevin listened, occasionally chiming in with questions about their past. The conversation stretched late into the evening, but it felt as though a huge weight had lifted, the darkness of unresolved resentment finally giving way to honest communication. Over the following weeks, Ebony and James navigated a fragile rekindling of their relationship. They didn't rush into anything, still healing from old scars. But Kevin sensed the growing affection between them. More dinners, more shared activities. James taught Kevin how to navigate Google Earth, pointing out flight routes, while Ebony offered her own insights about raising Kevin alone. They worked as a team to fix up Ebony's house, patching leaks and repainting the walls a fresh color. Laverne begrudgingly approved, even letting James fix a broken cabinet in her apartment. As the weeks turned into months, Ebony's trust in James solidified. They discussed deeper issues, finances, Kevin's future, even Ebony's dream of eventually attending night classes to improve her job prospects. James offered to support her, not in a showy way, but as a partner. Kevin thrived in this environment, his once quiet demeanor blooming with a newfound sense of confidence. One evening, with the living room freshly repainted and the aroma of home-cooked food wafting from the kitchen, Kevin sat between his parents on the couch. They were flipping through a photo album James had compiled of pictures from his pilot career, plus the new snapshots they had taken together in recent months. Ebony's eyes glowed with quiet contentment, her head resting against James's shoulder. Kevin glanced from one parent to the other, heart swelling with joy. "Are we a family now?" he asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. Ebony and James exchanged a tender look. James kissed Ebony's temple and she squeezed Kevin's hand. "Yes," she said, voice thick with emotion. "We are." Kevin felt tears sting his eyes. He had spent so many years wondering if he would ever say those words. Despite the years of hurt, the complexity of race and bias in the world, despite the uncertain future, this moment felt real. He nestled against them, feeling the warmth of their presence. Outside, the night stretched vast and still, but inside their small home, there was a closeness Kevin had never known. Weeks later, the day came for Kevin's school assembly, a moment when students could showcase their talents or projects. Kevin decided to display a new series of drawings he had been working on, inspired by his own life. One depicted a plane soaring through the clouds, another featured a boy peering through an open door, and the final piece showed 3 silhouettes holding hands. He was nervous, but proud. Ebony, James, and even Laverne were all in attendance. The teachers noted how Kevin's artwork had matured and carried a story within each sketch. When Kevin stood in front of the assembly, describing his drawings, he glanced at James in the audience. The big man dabbed at his eyes, overcome with emotion. Ebony sat beside him, smiling through tears. Laverne folded her arms, fighting a crack in her stern exterior. Kevin's voice wavered as he explained that his art was about finding what was lost. He ended by saying, "I learned that sometimes you have to open doors,
even if you're afraid of what's on the other side. Because sometimes you find something beautiful. Applause filled the auditorium. Students and parents smiled. Ebony held James's hand, tears streaming down her face. Kevin lowered the microphone, flushing with a mix of pride and overwhelming feeling. He had spoken from the heart, and in that moment, he felt the power of acceptance, healing, and hope. Later, the family reunited in the hallway, hugging Kevin, showering him with praise. Laverne even patted James's arm approvingly. "Good work, pilot," she said, her voice softening. James grinned, looking like he had just been handed the best gift of his life. That evening, they returned home. Ebony served a special dinner to celebrate Kevin's success. Afterward, James turned to Ebony, clearing his throat nervously. "There's something I want to ask," he began, eyes flicking to Kevin. Kevin recognized the tension in James's tone and exchanged a curious glance with his mother. James took a small breath. "I know things haven't been perfect. I know I have a lot more to prove. But I also know that I love you. I love our son. And I want to make this permanent, in whatever way you'll let me." Ebony's eyes widened. Kevin's heart fluttered. He had a sense of what was coming. James reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. He opened it to reveal a modest but elegant ring. Ebony gasped softly, tears brimming instantly. James spoke gently. "Will you marry me?" He looked at Kevin, then back to Ebony. "I don't want to rush you. I just want you both to know I'm here, that I'm not leaving again." Tears slid down Ebony's cheeks. She looked at Kevin, who nodded eagerly, heart pounding with excitement. Then, through her tears, Ebony whispered, "Yes." James slipped the ring on her finger, and they embraced. Kevin rushed to wrap his arms around them both, his heart overflowing with joy. It felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. For so long, he had yearned for this moment, a family united. Even with the shadows of the past, even with the complexity of the future, there was a sense of rightness in that embrace. The following months were a whirlwind of preparations, modest though they were. Ebony and James decided on a small ceremony at the local community center. Laverne helped coordinate the food, while Ebony's friends pitched in for decorations. Kevin's classmates teased him about becoming a ring bearer, but he didn't mind. He was too excited to care. The day of the wedding, Ebony wore a simple white dress that highlighted her natural beauty, while James wore his pilot's uniform jacket over formal trousers, a nod to the career that both separated him from and reunited him with his family. During the ceremony, Ebony and James exchanged vows in front of a small gathering of friends and relatives. The officiant asked if anyone objected, and a hush fell. Kevin tensed, glancing around, half expecting some ghost of the past to rise. But nobody spoke. Instead, Laverne dabbed at her eyes, her expression one of acceptance and love. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and they sealed it with a gentle kiss that drew cheers and applause from those gathered. Kevin felt tears streak down his own cheeks. He looked at the newlywed couple, his parents, and felt a surge of triumph over adversity, over lost time, over the biases of the world. His father might still be a pilot, flying off for days at a time, but now Kevin knew he had a home to return to, a family anchored by love and forgiveness. At the small reception afterward, Ebony and James danced, and Kevin joined them in a clumsy but heartfelt waltz. Laverne supervised the food table, making sure everyone had enough to eat. Music from an old stereo filled the room with warmth. Guests mingled, offering congratulations. A few commented on how miraculous it was for Ebony and James to reconnect after so many years.
how amazing it was that Kevin finally got the father he deserved. Near the end of the evening, Ebony and James thanked everyone for coming. Then Ebony took the microphone, glancing at James before focusing on Kevin. "I want to say something about my son," she began, voice trembling with emotion. "Kevin taught me the power of hope. Even when life was hard, he believed his father would come back someday. And through it all, he remained kind, loving, and true to himself. This moment is as much for him as it is for us." Applause broke out. Kevin's face burned with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. James put an arm around him, his expression shining with pride. This was the family Kevin had dreamed about. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was real, and it was his. In the days that followed, Kevin adjusted to the new normal of having both parents at home. James still traveled for work, but he always returned when he said he would. Ebony continued her job, though she was now exploring night classes. Kevin attended school with a lightness in his step, the knowledge that his father and mother were there for him. Sometimes, on James's days off, they would all drive out to a nearby field, spreading a blanket to watch planes pass overhead. James would share stories about flight maneuvers. Ebony would tease him gently about always talking shop, and Kevin would smile, feeling a profound sense of belonging. Years later, Kevin would reflect on that first moment in the airport when he looked at James and declared, "You're my dad." He would remember the tears that followed, the shock, the pain, and the overwhelming joy that came afterward. He would remember how Ebony swallowed her anger for his sake, how James stepped up to mend what was broken, and how Laverne guarded her family fiercely until she saw the honesty in James's efforts. He would remember the stares, the questions, the complexities of racial identity, and how, despite it all, love prevailed. He would look back on all the flight paths and roads that led to that pivotal confrontation, and how that confrontation became the beginning of a new life for all of them. Their story was not without obstacles, but it shone as an example of resilience, of a boy's unwavering hope, and of a pilot's tearful promise to never abandon his family again. Did you enjoy this story of ambition, courage, and the power of one voice to spark change? Let us know in the comments. What part resonated with you the most, or which character's journey surprised you? We love hearing your thoughts, and if you want more stories like this, full of twists, heart, and inspiration, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more where this came from, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey.